Hello there! My name's Brandon and I make pictures out of tiny squares. And in this video I'm making some pixel art based off of a reference photo. And the photo that I'm using, as you can see, is this street shot of a building. And I found this on pexels.com, which is a website that has tons of free to use stock photos. And just to give credit to the photographer right off the bat, this was taken by Amelia Halsworth. So thank you, Amelia, for putting that photo up there. What I like about this one is just that there's all these different sort of textures and materials that you can see across the building. And I thought it'd be fun to translate that into a 1-bit pixel art style. The canvas size I'm using here is 200 pixels wide by 300 pixels tall. And I decided on that because I noticed that the original photo had an aspect ratio of 2:3. So it was just kind of an easy approximate sizing based on that. So the way I've started here is just by setting up that side-by-side comparison with the photo. And I'm placing down some rough guides for the position of the various awnings and windows just to create a basic framework before zooming in to do the actual detailing. When you're working from a photo, I guess you could also maybe just resize it into your pixel sizing and then trace over it directly. But I find sometimes that approach can be sort of like a blurry mess because you're resizing the photo. And sometimes it's hard to resolve what's going on in the photo, what the details are. And it might actually even influence the way that you place details down. So the way I decided to use this was just by doing that side-by-side comparison, and then I still have a lot of freedom to play with my own interpretation on top of that. So with the guides in place, I'm now doing that work of actually creating the detail and the line work or structure of these objects. And when I'm translating those into my pixel art, I try to make sure that the line work can convey some kind of dimensionality for those objects. So with a 1-bit style, you can create this emphasis or dimension just by adding, extra line weight at the edges of certain objects. That will help give it more thickness or maybe suggest a bit of shadow, and it helps keep it separate from other objects. It's also important to watch out for tangents, like those would be areas where the edges of different pieces line up with each other exactly. So if two different pieces end up sharing the same line and they don't need to, sometimes they can confuse the eye, like you might read it as being one object entirely. But you can break this effect by just offsetting or bumping those parts away from each other a little bit to create some space. A good example of that here actually is the railing that's along the window. Like if I just left the bottom of it entirely flat all the way across, it might just read as blending together with the window frame a certain way. But here I've stuck the bottoms of the rails out just by a single pixel, and then you sort of get that indication that it's a different piece and it has some dimensionality to it. And so these choices, these kind of appearances, it's not something that exists in the reference photo. So that's where the idea of kind of having to translate this into pixel art comes into play, rather than just copying exactly what you see in the photo. One of the other things I tried to do to simplify the details from the photo was just work a lot with the idea of creating patterns to represent various materials and textures. Like I've used a lot of stripes to convey the metal paneling, and just applying it randomly in some cases to give that weathered appearance. Similarly, for something like the foliage, you can actually get a lot of mileage out of just creating a recognizable silhouette and then filling that in with a pattern. So in this case, I've filled in my silhouette of the leaves with these sort of little L shapes that I'm copy pasting around. And by the way, anytime you see me kind of rapidly copying and moving little pieces like that, in Photoshop, if you make a selection and then hold Alt and use the arrow key to move that, it actually creates a copy of the selection as a new layer. So I'm just kind of rapidly copying and moving all these little pieces around to kind of generate the pattern. And I use that a lot to create like repeating lines and stuff like that. Most of this artwork is made by using the 1-pixel pencil tool, set to either black or white, or just using the eraser to kind of carve out little details here and there. I generally find the simplicity of 1-bit work to be especially relaxing. Like pixel art in general can be really relaxing, but 1-bit is really unique in that way because rather than getting crazy with like shading and color harmony and worrying about all that sort of stuff, you're really just focused on the readability and the line work. And then in this case too, I'm just having a lot of fun exploring this idea of patterns and repetition that kind of brings its own unique level of complexity. That being said, I wanted to mention that I'm actually using a preset palette for this work, which I know sounds kind of funny because I'm just using black and white, but these are very specific and very special black and white that I'm using here. This is called the 1-bit Monitor Glow palette, and it was made by Polydux, who's done some really cool like retro Mac style pixel art. And they use this combination of a slightly washed out black and a white that has kind of a slight green tint to it. And it gives this more realistic interpretation of black and white, as if it's being viewed on a computer monitor, So going into the second half of the building here, some of the main pieces I've just copy pasted from the first half. The roof is a pretty obvious one to reuse, but even for other textures, once you've established certain patterns in your art, it's kind of important to bank those in your mind and then repeat them anytime they come up again in the drawing. It'll just help convey that it's the same material again, and then provide that level of consistency and cohesiveness to the art. When you're making new patterns in a 1-bit style though, I tend to pick out some kind of core feature of the reference item and then use that as the basis for the pattern. So like here, there's the cloth that's covering the window. It's got sort of a jagged edge along the bottom, and then on the inside maybe some kind of like a diamond pattern within it. And in the pixelated form, this just kind of translated into having alternating pixels along the bottom to create that jaggedness, and then kind of putting together little plus sign shapes for the diamonds, of course with some additional pixels to join it all together. It's just kind of fun to explore patterns and stuff in 1-bit. It feels like there's sort of an infinite number of options that you could use for creating different levels of shading and patterns. Probably a lot of them, for me anyway, come down to like different applications of straight lines or angled lines or dots. What I do sometimes is I'll just start from a perfect 50-50 checkerboard pattern, and then either add or erase from that just to see what's possible. Alright, the final addition here is just to create the tree that's sitting in front of the building. And I'm just making the silhouette for the tree trunk first using kind of a thicker pencil size. And then if you move the cursor to a new spot and hold shift while you click, it'll draw a connecting line to that new cursor position. So I'm just kind of creating all the other branches that way. Because this is such a different component of the drawing, I did this one as its own layer and actually reduced the opacity of the building behind it, just so I could focus on creating the tree kind of as its own thing. And then after, I'll worry about how it sits with the building. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the final artwork. And normally I have some sort of title. I don't really have a name for this one because it was just a photo study, so let's just roll the footage. Here we go. Okay, so you can see I finished this one off by adding a couple cats in there as well. I just sort of felt like bringing some kind of personal touch to it, and then also having something that I can animate. And we'll close this out on some CRT time to truly appreciate that 1-bit monitor glow. So thanks again to Amelia for the photo, and to Polydux for the palette, and thank you for watching, and take care and keep it square.